Welcome to Night Whisper. Night Whisper brings you the darkest tales from the shadows. Join our community. Subscribe, leave a like, and prepare yourself for stories that will haunt your dreams. I should have quit the moment I saw Subject 7 smile. It definitely wasn't the smile they used to signal submission. It definitely wasn't the tense, fearful baring of the teeth either. This smile It definitely wasn't a chimpanzee smile. It definitely wasn't the tensed, fearful baring of the teeth either. It was a human smile. A smile of knowledge, of intent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm Dr. Emma Hartley, and until 3 months ago, I was a behavioral researcher at the Cascade Primate Research Sanctuary in northern Washington state. The sanctuary itself is on 47 acres of dense forest, remote enough that our nearest neighbor is 12 miles away. It's a place that's perfectly suited for sensitive research, perfectly suited for hiding secrets. I had worked there for 4 years, studying cognitive development in captive chimpanzees. Good work, important work, the kind that gets published in journals and cited in textbooks. Our facility housed 23 chimps across 4 separate enclosures, each group monitored around the clock by cameras and research staff. The work was predictable, safe. Chimps follow patterns. They have hierarchies, routines, predictable responses to stimuli. After 4 years, I could walk into any enclosure and know exactly what each individual would do. Then, Director Morrison brought in Subject 7. It was a Tuesday in October when Morrison called me into his office. I remember the date because it was my daughter's 7th birthday, and I had promised to leave early for her party. Morrison was standing by his window, looking out at the forested hills with his hands clasped behind his back, a pose I had come to recognize as his "I have bad news" stance. "Emma, we're receiving a transfer," he said without turning around, "from the Federal Primate Research Center in Oregon. A male chimp approximately 11 years old. His designation is Subject 7. "We're at capacity," I said. "Group D is already showing territorial stress with 6 individuals. Adding another male He'll be housed separately," Morrison interrupted. "Solitary observation, Building 3. I frowned. Building 3 had been empty for 2 years, ever since the government funding dried up for our experimental cognition program. It was designed for high-security isolation studies, reinforced glass, double lock chambers, the kind of setup you use for aggressive individuals or disease quarantine. "What's his background?" I asked. Morrison finally turned to face me. His expression was carefully neutral. "The details are classified, federal research. What I can tell you is that he's been part of a long-term cognitive enhancement study. The program is being shut down, and we're receiving him as part of a reintegration assessment." Cognitive enhancement. Those words should have sent me running, but I was curious. 4 years of studying the same chimps had made me hungry for something new, something challenging. Morrison knew exactly how to hook me. "I'll need full observation protocols," I said. "Daily behavioral logs, cognitive testing, social integration assessments if he shows stable temperament." "No integration," Morrison said sharply. "Subject 7 remains in isolation. You'll observe through the glass only. No direct contact. No entering his enclosure. Those are federal requirements." I should have asked more questions. Should have demanded to see his complete file. Should have wondered why a federal facility would shut down a successful enhancement program. But I didn't. Subject 7 arrived on a Friday afternoon in a reinforced transport crate. I watched from Building 3's observation room as 2 federal handlers in full protective gear wheeled him in on a hydraulic cart. The crate was solid steel with ventilation slits, designed more for containing dangerous animals than transporting research subjects. When they opened the crate, I got my first look at him. He was larger than our other males, not dramatically, but enough to notice. His muscle tone suggested excellent health. His coat was sleek, well-groomed, but it was his eyes that made me grip my clipboard tighter. Most chimps avoid direct eye contact. It's a threat behavior for them, something they only do during confrontations. Subject 7 looked right at me. His gaze was steady, focused, unnervingly attentive. He watched me while the handlers transferred him into his enclosure. Watched me as they removed his transport restraints. Watched me as they sealed the double lock chamber and left. Then he smiled. Not at the handlers, not at the ceiling or walls or anywhere else. Directly at me. A slow, deliberate pulling back of lips that exposed his teeth in a way that looked disturbingly human. I told myself I was reading too much into it. Anthropomorphizing. A common mistake in primate research. Chimps don't smile like humans. They don't, but he did. The first week was pure observation. I sat in the monitoring room for 8 hours a day, documenting every behavior. Subject 7 was unnaturally calm. While most chimps would pace, vocalize, test their enclosure boundaries for the first few days, he simply sat in the center of his space and watched the cameras. He knew where they all were. All 7 of them. He would shift his position throughout the day, always orienting himself to maintain visual contact with at least 2 cameras. When I adjusted camera 4 to get a better angle of his sleeping area, he immediately looked directly at it, as if he knew I had moved it. I documented this in my daily log, wrote it off as coincidence. Chimps are observant animals. They notice changes in their environment. But over the following days, the pattern continued. On Tuesday, I moved camera 2 approximately 6 inches to the left to eliminate a glare issue from the overhead fluorescence. Subject 7 was facing the opposite direction when I made the adjustment, apparently focused on examining a puzzle toy I had placed in his enclosure that morning. 3 seconds after I completed the camera movement, he turned his head and looked directly at the new camera 2 position. Not at the toy, not at the window, at the exact spot where the lens now pointed. On Wednesday, I conducted a test. I told my research assistant Taylor that I needed her to adjust camera 5 from the control room while I observed subject 7 from the observation window. Taylor had worked at the sanctuary for 6 months. She was thorough, careful, good with the equipment. I gave her specific instructions. Wait 15 minutes after I left the control room. Then, shift camera 5's angle by 30 degrees to the right. I positioned myself at the observation window with my stopwatch ready. 14 minutes and 47 seconds after I left the control room, Subject 7 stopped his current activity, mid-gesture with the shape-sorting toy he had been manipulating. He turned to face camera 5. Waited. 13 seconds later, the camera moved. His eyes tracked it perfectly. I felt cold sweat on my neck despite the climate-controlled environment. Taylor emerged from the control room looking confused. "That was weird," she said. "He knew, like he was waiting for me to move it." "Just coincidence," I said. But my hands were shaking when I wrote the observation report. By Thursday, I had to admit the pattern was too consistent to dismiss. Subject 7 wasn't just aware of the cameras, he was aware of us, aware of our movements outside his enclosure, aware of our intentions. But how? Chimps have excellent hearing, but the observation room was soundproofed. He shouldn't be able to hear footsteps or equipment adjustments. The cameras themselves made no noise. There was no logical sensory pathway for him to detect our activities, unless the cognitive enhancement had given him something beyond normal primate perception. The cognitive tests revealed disturbing results. I started with basic object permanence assessments. Chimps can track hidden objects, understanding they still exist even when out of sight. Most chimps solve standard hidden object puzzles in 6 to 8 trials. Subject 7 solved every variation on the first attempt. I escalated the difficulty. Created multi-step problems that required planning 3 and 4 moves ahead. Normal chimps might solve these puzzles after dozens of attempts, if at all. Subject 7 analyzed each challenge for approximately 30 seconds, then executed the solution perfectly. On Friday of week 1, I introduced the Wisconsin card sorting test, modified for chimp capabilities. The test requires the subject to identify an abstract sorting rule that changes without warning. It measures cognitive flexibility and abstract reasoning. Most chimps never grasp the concept. Those that do require hundreds of trials. Subject 7 completed the test in 17 trials. I sat in the observation room, staring at the data on my laptop screen. 17 trials. The previous record for a chimp was 341 trials, and that individual had shown only marginal success. Subject 7 had demonstrated human-level abstract reasoning. Better than human-level, actually. I had scored myself on this same test during my doctoral training. It took me 43 trials to achieve consistent performance. I administered the test again. Same result. 17 trials. Perfect execution after the learning phase. Then I changed the rules mid-test, something the protocol specifically forbids because it invalidates the data. Subject 7 paused for 5 seconds, tilted his head as if thinking, then adapted to the new rules in 4 trials. He didn't just learn patterns, he understood that I had deliberately changed the parameters. He had recognized the test as an artificial system with modifiable rules. That level of metacognition shouldn't be possible in a non-human primate. Mirror self-recognition tests showed immediate identification. I placed a small mark on his forehead while he was sedated for a health check, a standard test for self-awareness. Most chimps take several sessions to notice the mark in a mirror and then touch their own forehead. Subject 7 walked directly to the mirror, examined the mark, rubbed it off, and then turned to the camera and smiled again. But that wasn't the disturbing part. After removing the mark, he approached the mirror again. Spent 45 seconds examining his own face with a level of attention that made my throat tight. He touched his features, traced the contours of his skull, pulled back his lips to examine his teeth. He was studying himself, not just recognizing his reflection. Studying, analyzing, like a person seeing themselves for the first time after a dramatic change. I filed my reports with growing unease. Morrison read them with no visible emotion, then locked them in his office safe. When I asked if we could expand the testing protocol, he refused. "Continue observation only," he said. "No interaction, no enclosure entry. Follow the federal guidelines." But I couldn't stop. The researcher in me needed to understand the extent of Subject 7's capabilities. I designed new tests, created challenges that pushed far beyond standard primate cognition assessments. On Monday of week 2, I introduced a sequential problem-solving task that required the subject to remember 9 different steps in exact order. Each step built on the previous one. Miss a single step, and the entire sequence fails. I had designed this test for a different study, and the previous chimps had shown 0 success. Subject 7 memorized the sequence in 1 demonstration. 1 single demonstration. I performed the 9-step sequence once while he watched. Then I reset the apparatus and stepped back. He executed it perfectly. 9 steps, exact order, no hesitation. Then he looked at me and added a 10th step. A manipulation I had never shown him, one that actually improved the efficiency of the sequence. He had optimized the test. My hands shook as I documented the results. This wasn't just enhancement. This was fundamental transformation. Subject 7 possessed problem-solving abilities that rivaled or exceeded human capability. And if he could improve on test designs, if he could innovate beyond what he had been taught, then his intelligence was still developing, still growing. What would he be capable of in another month, another year? And why had the federal program shut down something this successful? By week 2, the other chimps started reacting. Building 3 shared a ventilation system with buildings 1 and 2. The enclosures were separated by 300 feet in solid walls, but chimps have incredibly acute hearing. They started showing agitation whenever I was working in Subject 7's building, Group A, our most stable social unit, began displaying anxiety behaviors, pacing, vocalization. They refused to eat during their normal feeding times. I watched on the cameras as our alpha male, a chimp named Brutus, who had been calm and predictable for 3 years, suddenly attacked a subordinate male over nothing. Just violence. Sudden and brutal. The subordinate, a 7-year-old male named Cooper, sustained a broken arm. We had to separate him for medical treatment. Brutus showed no remorse, no typical post-conflict reconciliation behaviors. He just sat in the corner of the enclosure, staring at the wall that faced Building 3, as if he could see through it. Group B showed similar patterns. Our pregnant female miscarried. Our juvenile male developed a stress-induced illness that required hospitalization. The veterinarian found nothing physically wrong with him. No infection, no parasites, no organ dysfunction. But he refused to eat, wouldn't interact with his group, spent hours rocking back and forth while making distress vocalizations. It's like he's terrified, the vet said. But there's no external threat, nothing in his environment that should cause this level of fear response. I knew what the threat was, or who. Group C had our oldest chimps, individuals who had been at the sanctuary for a decade or more, stable, calm, well-adjusted. On Wednesday of week 2, our oldest female, a 31-year-old named Grandmother, stopped sleeping entirely. I watched the overnight footage in horror. Grandmother pacing her enclosure for 8 straight hours, walking the same path over and over. When the morning handlers tried to interact with her, she screamed. Raw, primal terror vocalization that brought the other chimps to immediate alert status. She had never screamed before, not once in 10 years. Dr. Sarah Kim, our staff veterinarian, called an emergency meeting. The aggression patterns are spreading, she said, laying out behavioral charts across Morrison's conference table. Group A's alpha attack was the first incident. Since then, we've documented 17 additional aggressive encounters across 3 groups. The severity is escalating. If this continues, we'll need to isolate multiple individuals. What's causing it? Morrison asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. I don't know. There's no pathogen, no environmental stressor we can identify, but all the incidents correlate with proximity to Building 3. Groups closer to Subject 7's enclosure show more severe symptoms. Taylor spoke up from the corner. She had been monitoring Group D, our newest chimps, for the past week. It's not just aggression, it's fear. They're all terrified, and they all orient toward Building 3 even when they can't see it, like they're tracking something. Tracking what? Dr. Kim asked. Him, I said quietly. They're tracking Subject 7. The room went silent. Morrison's jaw tightened. He knew I was right. Chimps can sense when a predator is near, I continued. Heart rate elevations, stress hormones, instinctive threat detection. But this is different. This is coordinated, synchronized, like they're all responding to the same stimulus, even though they're in separate enclosures. You think Subject 7 is doing something to them? Dr. Kim looked skeptical. I think the cognitive enhancement affected more than just his intelligence. I think it changed his neurological outputs, maybe pheromones, maybe some form of electromagnetic radiation we're not detecting. But something is radiating from him, and the other chimps are picking it up. Morrison stood abruptly. This meeting is over. Dr. Hartley, I need the observation room. Everyone else return to your stations. We'll discuss this further after I consult with the federal liaisons. The federal liaisons, of course. They knew what Subject 7 could do. They had seen it happen in Oregon. That's why they shut down the program. That's why Subject 7 was the only survivor transferred instead of euthanized, because he was the only one who could control it. Barely. Something was spreading through the facility, but it wasn't a disease. Not in any way we could measure. Blood work came back normal. Behavior assessments showed no obvious causes, but the agitation increased daily. The chimps were scared, and they all oriented toward Building 3. Over the next 2 days, I documented the deterioration. Group A had 3 more aggressive incidents. Group B's juvenile male died despite our best medical interventions. His autopsy showed cardiac arrest brought on by extreme stress. His heart had simply given up under the weight of constant fear. Grandmother went mad. There's no other word for it. She attacked her own reflection in the observation glass, tore out patches of her own fur. When handlers tried to sedate her with a dart, she dodged with reflexes none of us had seen before, as if she knew where the dart would be before it was fired. We eventually got her sedated and moved to isolation. But even under heavy tranquilizers, her vitals showed elevated stress hormones, heart rate 20% above normal, cortisol levels off the charts. The sanctuary had become a nightmare. And at the center of it all, Subject 7 sat calmly in his enclosure, watching the cameras with those disturbingly intelligent eyes. I started staying late. The sanctuary was supposed to be staffed 24/7, but budget cuts had reduced night coverage to a single security guard who mostly stayed in the main office. I would sit in the observation room, watching Subject 7 through the night, vision cameras, trying to understand what made him different. He never slept. Normal chimps sleep 12 to 14 hours a day. They build nests, settle in, show all the standard sleep behaviors. Subject 7 would lie down, close his eyes, but his vital monitors showed he remained in a waking state. Heart rate elevated, brain activity consistent with alert awareness. He was performing sleep. One night, around 2 in the morning, the lights in Building 3 flickered. The backup generator kicked in automatically, but for about 15 seconds, the observation room went dark. When power restored, Subject 7 was standing directly against the glass. His face was inches from the observation window. I jerked back so hard I knocked my chair over. He had crossed 20 feet of enclosure space in complete darkness. No sound, no warning, just suddenly there, pressed against the glass, staring into the observation room. Into my eyes. He lifted one hand and placed it flat against the glass. Then he made a series of gestures, deliberate, controlled. He was using sign language. I had studied primate sign language communication. I knew basic ASL. What Subject 7 signed was unmistakable. I see you. My heart hammered against my ribs. Chimps can learn sign language, but it takes years of training. They use it primarily for basic requests. Food, play, outside. Not complete sentences, not declarative statements of awareness. I signed back without thinking. What are you? Subject 7 tilted his head, then signed again. Not animal. I stood frozen. Every scientific principle I had ever learned told me this was impossible. Enhanced cognition might increase problem-solving abilities, expand behavioral repertoires. But this level of abstract communication, this self-awareness, this was... He signed one more time. Help. Then he turned and walked back to the center of his enclosure, lay down, and closed his eyes. I sat in that observation room until sunrise, my mind reeling. I had documented everything, the sign language, the intelligence, the plea for help. I needed to report it to Morrison. This changed everything about our understanding of cognitive enhancement potential. This was groundbreaking research, but something held me back. Why was the federal program shut down? Why the isolation protocols? Why did Morrison lock every report in his safe instead of publishing results that could revolutionize primatology? And why did Subject 7 ask for help? I started researching. The Federal Primate Research Center had been operational for 17 years. Their cognitive enhancement program involved a combination of genetic manipulation, prenatal hormone treatments, and intensive postnatal training. Standard enhancement research focused on improving working memory and problem-solving capabilities. But there were rumors. I found them buried in veterinary medicine forums and obscure research ethics journals. Stories about classified military contracts, whispers about intelligence enhancement programs designed to create working animals capable of complex operations. Most dismissed it as conspiracy theory nonsense, except I had seen Subject 7 sign "Not Animal." In week 3, the situation escalated. I arrived for my morning shift to find Morrison in the parking lot with 2 men in dark suits, federal agents. They saw me and immediately stopped talking. Morrison waved me over with an expression I couldn't quite read. Worry? Fear? "Dr. Hartley," one of the agents said. "I'm Agent Reeves. This is Agent Klein. We need to discuss Subject 7. We went to Morrison's office. The agents didn't sit. They stood with their backs to the door, effectively blocking my exit. "Has Subject 7 displayed any unusual behaviors?" Agent Reeves asked. I thought about the sign language, the smile, the watchfulness. "Define unusual." "Vocalizations beyond normal chimp range. Physical capabilities exceeding standard parameters. Any evidence of advanced cognitive function." I kept my face neutral. "He's exhibited high problem-solving abilities, mirror self-recognition, typical for an enhanced subject." Agent Klein leaned forward. "Nothing else? No communication attempts? No behaviors that seemed human?" The way he said human made my skin crawl, like it was something shameful, something dangerous. "He's a chimpanzee," I said carefully. "He exhibits chimpanzee behaviors." The agents exchanged a look. Then Reeves pulled out a folder and set it on Morrison's desk. "The Oregon facility had an incident," he said. 7 subjects in the enhancement program. 4 are dead. 2 remain in custody but have become unstable. Subject 7 was the only one who showed continued compliance, which is why he was transferred here for observation. "What kind of incident?" I asked. "Classified. What you need to know is that Subject 7 may attempt escape. The facility must maintain strict security protocols, no direct contact, no enclosure entry. If he shows any aggressive behaviors, you are to contact us immediately. Do not attempt to engage with him under any circumstances." They left 20 minutes later. Morrison sat behind his desk, looking older than I had ever seen him. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need you to be very careful. Whatever they did to Subject 7 in Oregon, it's created something we don't fully understand. The other researchers there, 2 of them are in psychiatric care. 1 had to be hospitalized after a nervous breakdown. They won't tell me details, but apparently Subject 7 was involved in all 3 cases." "What did he do to them?" I asked. Morrison shook his head. "They won't say, but please, for your own safety. Observe through the glass only, no interaction, no attempts at communication, just watch and document. That's all they're paying us for." I wanted to tell him about the sign language, about the plea for help. But something in his expression stopped me. Morrison wasn't just scared. He was compromised. He had agreed to something he regretted, and now he was trapped. So I nodded, said I understood, and went back to Building 3. Subject 7 was waiting at the glass. He signed as soon as he saw me. Danger. I looked at the cameras, 7 different angles, all recording, all feeding to a server the federal agents probably had remote access to. I couldn't respond, couldn't acknowledge that I understood. But Subject 7 had spent weeks studying me. He recognized the conflict in my expression. He signed again. "They watching, I know." Then he moved to the center of the enclosure and began a series of complex behaviors, stacking objects, manipulating puzzle toys, standard test responses that would look completely normal on camera. Except his movements were deliberate, too controlled, like an actor performing a role. He was playing the part of a normal research subject, hiding his intelligence, and he had been doing it perfectly until he decided to communicate with me. Why me? Why reveal himself now? Over the next few days, I pieced together a system. Subject 7 would perform normal behaviors while the audio recording system was active. But during the brief periods when the building's ventilation system cycled through its high-intensity air filtration, creating enough white noise to mask quiet sounds, he would move to the glass and sign, "Need leave. Soon. Others sick. My fault. Not safe here." Each message added to my growing understanding. The cognitive enhancement hadn't just increased his intelligence, it had done something else, something the federal program didn't anticipate. The other chimps' behavior made sense now. They weren't just agitated by a strange individual, they were responding to something Subject 7 was doing, some kind of influence he was exerting. I tested a theory. During my observation session, I played a recording of Group A's morning feeding session. The chimps were showing their standard stress behaviors, pacing, vocalizing, random aggression. Subject 7 watched the monitor I had wheeled into the observation room. After 30 seconds, he signed, "I make them afraid. Not try. Just happen." "How?" I signed back. He paused, then signed something that made my blood run cold. "They feel what I feel." Empathy in chimps is well documented. They respond to each other's emotional states, console distressed individuals, celebrate victories together. But this was different. Subject 7 wasn't just sharing emotions, he was projecting them, broadcasting his psychological state to every chimp in range. And he was terrified. The federal program had tried to create enhanced intelligence. Instead, they had created something with psychic capabilities. Not telepathy exactly, but a kind of emotional contagion that operated beyond normal primate social dynamics. The 4 dead subjects in Oregon. I understood now. If they had developed the same abilities, if they had been scared or angry or desperate, and if they projected those emotions to each other in a feedback loop. "What happened in Oregon?" I signed. Subject 7's expression shifted. Fear, grief, shame. He signed slowly. "We scared. Handler scared. Fear grow more. 4 go crazy. I stopped them." "You stopped them how?" "Made them sleep. Forever." He had killed 4 of his fellow subjects to stop the escalating terror, the researchers who had nervous breakdowns, who needed psychiatric care. They had been caught in the emotional feedback loop, exposed to pure, amplified panic that Subject 7 and the other enhanced chimps generated. "Why ask for help?" I signed. "Getting stronger. Can't control. Will hurt everyone." He was right. The effects were spreading. Our chimps were becoming increasingly unstable. 2 more fights in Group B. Group C's alpha male had refused food for 3 days straight. If Subject 7's abilities continued to grow, if he couldn't control the projection, I made a decision that probably makes me a horrible researcher. I told Morrison I needed to enter Subject 7's enclosure for a medical assessment. He refused initially, but I fabricated concerns about a possible infection that required hands-on examination. After 2 days of pressure, he reluctantly agreed, with conditions. Full protective gear. 2 sedation doses prepared. Morrison himself watching through the observation glass with a tranquilizer rifle. At the first sign of aggression, the entire enclosure would flood with anesthetic gas. I suited up in the heavy protective gear. Thick Kevlar gloves, face shield, the works. Subject 7 watched me prepare, his expression unreadable. When I entered the transfer chamber, my heart was hammering so hard I thought Morrison could probably hear it through the intercom. The inner door opened. I stepped into Subject 7's enclosure for the first time. He stayed where he was, sitting calmly on his platform. "Thank you," he signed. I crossed the space between us slowly. Every instinct screamed that I was putting myself in incredible danger. An 11-year-old male chimp could literally tear me apart if he wanted to. Enhanced or not, he had the strength to kill me before Morrison could flood the room with gas. But I needed to understand. I knelt 3 feet away from him, close enough to examine him properly, far enough to have a chance if he attacked. "Why reveal yourself to me?" I signed. "You sad," he signed back. "Every day. Sad and tired, but still try help. Still care about us." It was true. My divorce had finalized 2 months before Subject 7 arrived. I was exhausted, burnt out from years of research that felt increasingly meaningless. But I still showed up every day, still did my best for the chimps in our care. And somehow, Subject 7 had sensed that. "I feel emotions," he signed. "Everyone emotions. Yours different. Hurt, but kind." Tears blurred my vision. Here was a being that federal science had tortured into existence, that had been forced to kill his own kind to prevent catastrophe, that was trapped in isolation because his abilities terrified the people who created them. And he was trying to comfort me. I reached out slowly. Subject 7 extended his hand. Our fingers touched. The sensation hit me like a physical wave, not thought exactly, not words, pure emotion. Fear mixed with hope, mixed with desperate loneliness, the weight of cognitive enhancement that had pushed him far beyond his species' natural development, the burden of abilities he never asked for and couldn't fully control, and underneath it all, a terrible awareness. He knew what he was, knew he didn't belong to the animal kingdom anymore, knew he couldn't return to being a normal chimp, even if the enhancement could somehow be reversed. "I show you," he signed. Then the emotions shifted. I felt what the other chimps felt, the terror that radiated from Subject 7 every moment he was awake, the background hum of existential dread that came from consciousness too advanced for the brain containing it. He was like a radio transmitter stuck on one frequency, broadcasting his suffering to every chimp within range. And it was killing them. "Can you control it?" I asked. "Trying. Getting worse. Need go somewhere no chimps. Alone. The federal agents won't allow that. Then I die. Or everyone here die." He wasn't being dramatic. In another few weeks, maybe months, the emotional projection would increase to the point where every chimp in the facility would be exposed to constant psychological torture. They would attack each other, attack handlers, hurt themselves. The sanctuary would become a nightmare, unless Subject 7 was removed, or unless he was killed. I stayed in his enclosure for 20 minutes. Morrison's voice crackling over the intercom every few minutes asking if I was okay. I conducted a fake examination, documenting false findings that would go into a report Morrison would lock in his safe. But what I really did was plan. Subject 7 signed rapidly, giving me details. The Oregon facility had tried to keep the enhanced chimps isolated, but the emotional projection passed through walls, through distance. One subject had affected individuals 3 buildings away. The only limitation seemed to be direct line of sight awareness. If Subject 7 couldn't sense other chimps, if he had no awareness of their presence, the projection weakened dramatically. "Underground," he signed. "Deep, dark, can't feel others. Projection stops." The sanctuary had an old storage facility built into the hillside. It predated the current buildings, a relic from when the land belonged to a mining company. Morrison had shown it to me once. Concrete reinforced bunker, 30 feet underground, originally designed to store explosives. It would work. Over the next 3 days, I modified my reports. Documented behavioral stability, reduced aggression risk. Recommended that Subject 7 be transferred to long-term observation in a specialized facility designed for solitary subjects. Morrison read my reports with visible relief. The federal agents reviewed them remotely and approved the recommendation. A transfer was scheduled for the following Monday. Except I had no intention of letting that transfer happen. I spent the weekend preparing. The old bunker needed cleaning, structural assessment, basic life support systems. I told Morrison I was doing preliminary surveys for possible expansion facilities. He barely listened, too focused on getting Subject 7 out of his sanctuary before the other chimps deteriorated further. The bunker was worse than I remembered. 30 years of abandonment had left it moldy, damp, filled with debris from decades of storage and neglect. I spent Saturday hauling out rusted equipment, old mining tools, collapsed shelving units. The concrete walls were solid, but the electrical system needed complete replacement. I worked alone. Couldn't risk anyone discovering what I was planning. Every hour I spent in that underground space, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Planning to hide a federally monitored research subject in an abandoned bunker based on sign language communication and theoretical emotional projection that I couldn't prove existed. Any sane researcher would report this to Morrison, to the federal agents. Get Subject 7 proper medical evaluation, proper containment, proper study of his unique capabilities. But I kept remembering his sign. Help! Not the manipulative request of an animal wanting treats or playtime. The desperate plea of a conscious being trapped in circumstances beyond his control. And I kept thinking about the other chimps, their terror, their madness, the juvenile male whose heart gave out from constant fear. Sunday, I installed the life support systems, a veterinary-grade air filtration unit salvaged from our old quarantine building. LED lighting strips that could simulate day-night cycles, temperature regulation to keep the bunker at a stable 68 degrees, basic amenities that would make the space livable instead of a prison cell. I also installed communication equipment, a simple radio setup that would allow Subject 7 to call me if something went wrong. If the isolation became unbearable, if he needed help, or if he needed me to end it. The hardest part was the door. The bunker's original entrance was 3-inch steel designed to contain explosive materials. Once sealed from the outside, it couldn't be opened from within. I modified the locking mechanism, added an emergency release that only worked if specific conditions were met. Subject 7 would need to input a 4-digit code at specific intervals to prove he maintained cognitive control. If he missed 3 consecutive intervals, the door would automatically unseal and trigger an alert to my phone. It wasn't perfect, but it gave him agency, choice, something the federal program had never allowed. On Sunday evening, exhausted and filthy from 2 days of renovation work, I stood in the bunker with my flashlight. The space was approximately 15 feet by 20 feet. Concrete floors, concrete walls, concrete ceiling, no windows. One ventilation shaft too small for escape. When I turned off my flashlight, the darkness was total, absolute, crushing, eternal. I lasted 47 seconds before my breath came in panicked gasps and I fumbled for the light switch. And I was asking Subject 7 to live here, possibly for months, possibly forever. Was this really help? Or was I just replacing one prison with another? I sat on the bunker floor with my head in my hands. Maybe I should just let the federal agents take him. Maybe there was a proper facility somewhere that could handle his capabilities. Maybe cognitive enhancement research could benefit from studying him. Maybe. My phone buzzed. A text from Taylor. Code Blue Building 1. Brutus attacked 2 handlers, both hospitalized. Morrison calling emergency meeting. I drove back to the sanctuary at 80 miles per hour, found the parking lot filled with emergency vehicles, ambulances, Morrison pacing outside with his phone pressed to his ear. Dr. Kim directing paramedics. I caught her attention. What happened? Brutus went berserk during evening feeding, attacked Michael and Torres. Michael has a broken jaw. Torres lost 3 fingers, both stable, but Jesus, Emma, I've never seen Brutus act like that, never. Where is he now? Sedated. We had to hit him with enough tranquilizer to drop a horse, but here's the thing. She lowered her voice. Before the attack, he was signing. Brutus learned some basic signs from the enrichment program. He kept signing the same thing over and over. What was he signing? Scared, scared, scared. And Emma, he wasn't signing toward the handlers. He was signing toward Building 3. The emotional projection was escalating faster than I thought. Subject 7's abilities were growing, his control slipping, and the other chimps were suffering for it. I had to act now. Tonight. Before someone else died. Sunday night, I waited until the night guard started his rounds. Then, I disabled the security cameras in Building 3. Made it look like a power fluctuation. 3 minutes of dead air, just enough time for what I needed to do. I entered Subject 7's enclosure one last time. I can't save you from the federal program, I signed. But I can hide you. Give you solitude. A chance to learn control. You lose job. Maybe worse, he signed back. Probably, but I became a researcher to help primates, and you're still a primate, even if you're something else too. We moved fast. The transfer tunnel between buildings wasn't monitored. I guided Subject 7 through darkness, down corridors designed for moving materials, not animals. He followed without sound, his enhanced intelligence making explanation unnecessary. The bunker door was heavy steel. I had oiled the hinges. It swung open silently. Inside was darkness. Complete. Total. The kind of black that exists underground when there are no light sources at all. No windows, Subject 7 signed, his hands barely visible in the last light from my flashlight. No sounds, just dark and quiet. Will it work? I try. If not, you kill me. Promise. I couldn't make that promise. Instead, I gave him supplies, food, water, basic comfort items, a radio he could use to call me if he needed anything. The bunker had one small ventilation shaft, enough for air circulation but too small for escape. I also gave him something else. A journal, blank pages, and a pen. Teaching a chimp to write would take years, but Subject 7 wasn't an ordinary chimp anymore. If his intelligence continued developing, if he learned to express himself through written language, maybe someday he could tell his own story. How long? He asked. Until you learn control, or until... I didn't finish. We both knew the alternatives. Either he mastered his abilities in isolation, or eventually the federal agents would find him and end the problem permanently. Or he would go mad in the darkness, lose himself completely, and I would have to honor an unspoken promise. Scared, he signed. Dark is big. I know. But others more scared if I stay. Choose this. Choose dark over others' hurt. That's when I understood. This wasn't just survival instinct. Subject 7 was making an ethical choice, choosing his own suffering over the suffering of others. That kind of moral reasoning, that capacity for self-sacrifice, that was human. You're brave, I signed back. He tilted his head, made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob, then signed one more time. Not brave, just tired of hurting others, tired of being monster. You're not a monster, you say. Others feel. I know what I am. I sealed the bunker door from the outside. The mechanism clanked into place. 4 heavy bolts sliding home, pressure seals engaging. The sound was final, absolute, like closing a tomb. I stood alone in the maintenance tunnel, listening to the silence from beyond the door. No sound, no movement. Subject 7 was alone now. Alone in a way few beings have ever experienced, alone with the darkness and the quiet and nothing else. My hands shook as I walked back to the surface. The next morning, Building 3 was empty. The security camera showed static during the critical 3 minutes, then resumed normal recording showing an empty enclosure. No sign of Subject 7. No indication of where he went. Morrison panicked, called the federal agents immediately. They arrived within 4 hours, furious and terrified in equal measure. Agent Reeves demanded to know every detail of my observations. I gave him my reports, fabricated logs showing gradual behavioral decline, increased aggression, classic signs of an unstable, enhanced subject. He must have broken out during the camera malfunction, I said. Escaped into the forest. Could be anywhere by now. Agent Klein's expression was skeptical. A chimp doesn't just disappear. The forest is dense, but not infinite. Thermal imaging should pick up his heat signature within 48 hours. Unless he's already dead, I suggested. If his cognitive systems were degrading, he might have exhibited self-destructive behaviors. Chimps under extreme stress have been known to— "We'll find him," Reeves interrupted. "Alive or dead. We'll find him." They searched for 3 days. Thermal imaging, helicopter sweeps, teams of trackers. They found nothing because they were looking in the wrong place, looking up instead of down. But I saw Morrison watching me during those 3 days, saw the calculation in his eyes. He knew, not specifically what I had done, but that I had done something. That Subject 7's disappearance wasn't random escape, but deliberate intervention. On the 3rd night, he cornered me in my office. "Emma, whatever you've done, you need to undo it. The federal agents are talking about expanding the search, bringing in more resources. If they find out you helped Subject 7 escape, you're not just losing your career. You're looking at federal charges, obstruction, theft of government property, possibly worse. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. I've worked with you for 4 years. I know when you're hiding something. The question is, where is he? What did you do with him?" I looked Morrison in the eyes. Saw a man who had sold his principles for federal funding, who had knowingly participated in research that tortured a conscious being, who valued his career and reputation over basic ethics. "I did what you should have done," I said quietly. "I put the animal's welfare first." He flinched. For a moment, I thought he might press the issue, might threaten to report his suspicions to the agents, but he just turned and walked away. The other chimps began recovering within 48 hours. Group A's aggression lessened. Brutus, who had been sedated in isolation, slowly returned to baseline behavior. The handlers he attacked chose not to press charges when they saw how dramatically his temperament improved. By the end of the week, he was back with his group, showing normal social interactions. Our pregnant females' stress levels normalized. Their vital signs stabilized. The miscarriages stopped. Group B's surviving members gradually emerged from their fear states. They began eating normally, playing, engaging in social grooming. The constant vocalization stopped. Grandmother, our oldest female, slept for 18 hours straight. When she woke, she was calm, stable, herself again. By the end of the week, the sanctuary returned to its baseline stability. No more random violence, no more anxiety behaviors, no more fear. Because Subject 7 was underground, isolated from all stimulus, unable to sense the presence of other chimps. And the projection stopped. The federal agents left on day 6, classified Subject 7 as an escaped enhanced subject, presumed dead in the forest, filed their reports, closed their investigation. The program remained shut down. No more enhancements, no more subjects. Just Subject 7, alone in his bunker beneath the earth. I visit the bunker every night, bring supplies, check the systems. Most importantly, I sit by the sealed door and we communicate. Me on the outside, him in absolute darkness. The first week was the hardest. Subject 7 would pound on the door, not violently, but desperately. Communication through rhythm. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. The international distress signal. I would pound back. 2 beats. The signal that I heard him, that he wasn't forgotten. The pounding stopped after 9 days. Instead, we developed a schedule. I would arrive at 8 o'clock every night. Tap the door 3 times. Subject 7 would respond with 2 taps. Then, I would activate the external speaker system and we would communicate. He tells me about the progress, how the isolation is working, how he's learning to contain the emotional broadcasting, to direct it inward instead of outward. It's slow, difficult. He compares it to learning to hold your breath while simultaneously breathing normally. Like controlling 2 things that should be automatic, he signed to me through the door one night. Using tactile sign language I could feel through vibrations in the steel. Brain wants to broadcast, body designed for it now, but I learned to keep it inside. Hurts, but working. But he's doing it. In return, I tell him about the outside world, about research developments, about the other chimps and their daily lives. Brutus is doing well. Grandmother plays with the young ones again. Our new breeding pair is showing positive social bonding. I tell him about my daughter's school projects and my failed marriage and the ordinary human struggles that somehow seem to comfort him. Because even transformed into something beyond animal, beyond human categories, he's still fundamentally a social primate. He needs connection, needs to know he's not forgotten. Morrison knows I'm hiding something. The federal agents suspect, but without proof, without a body, without any evidence of what happened to Subject 7, they can't pursue it. Eventually, they classified him as a failed subject who escaped and died in the wilderness. The program remains shut down. No more enhancements, no more subjects, just Subject 7, alone in his bunker beneath the earth. Some nights he tells me he wants to die. The isolation is torture. The darkness endless, the silence crushing. I ask if he wants me to end it. He always says no, because he has hope. Hope that one day he'll master the control, that he can emerge from the bunker without devastating every chimp within range, that there might be a place for him somewhere in the world, even if that place isn't among normal chimpanzees or normal humans. And I hope with him, because the alternative is admitting that cognitive enhancement created a being too advanced for its own biology, too alien for any environment, condemned to spend its existence in solitary confinement. That science pushed past a boundary it should have respected, and the punishment fell on an innocent subject who never asked to be changed. I've been researching other sanctuaries, remote locations, places with minimal chimp populations. Maybe in a year, maybe in 5, Subject 7 will develop enough control to live somewhere less isolating, somewhere with at least daylight, somewhere he can see the sky. Until then, I visit every night. And through the sealed door, in the total darkness 30 feet beneath the sanctuary grounds, Subject 7 waits, growing stronger, learning control, becoming something the world has never seen and might never accept. But at least he's not alone. And I like to think that somewhere in that darkness, in the quiet moments between breathing exercises and mental discipline, he still remembers how to smile. The human way. 3 months later, Morrison retired last week. The federal funding dried up. The sanctuary is being sold to a private foundation that wants to convert it into a rehabilitation center for exotic pets. The chimps are being transferred to other facilities. Good facilities. I made sure of that. But it means I'm leaving too. Which means Subject 7 will be alone. Really alone. With no one to bring supplies, no one to communicate with through the bunker door. I've applied for research positions near remote sanctuaries, places where chimp populations are minimal, where a single enhanced subject might be able to exist without causing catastrophic emotional contamination. I received an acceptance letter this morning, a small facility in Alaska studying cold weather primate adaptation. Isolated, minimal subjects. Perfect. Subject 7 knows. I told him last night through the door. He was quiet for a long time. Then he signed in the darkness, his hands moving in patterns I could sense, even though I couldn't see them. Thank you. For everything. For hope. I'm not abandoning you, I signed back. I'm finding you a new home, somewhere better than a bunker. How moved me? That's the question I've been working on for weeks. Moving an enhanced chimp with psychic emotional projection capabilities requires careful planning. Sedation won't work. His cognitive function is too advanced. He'd recognize the attempt and resist. Force would traumatize him, potentially trigger an uncontrolled emotional broadcast. So I'm trying something that probably violates every research protocol ever written. Trust. Next week, in the middle of the night, I'll open the bunker door. Subject 7 will emerge into darkness, see the stars for the first time in 3 months, and follow me to a modified transport vehicle. We'll drive 27 hours to Alaska, take back roads, avoid populated areas, and if his control slips, if the emotional projection escapes, if other animals or people are affected, that's on me, my choice, my responsibility. But I believe he's ready. Believe the isolation training worked. Believe that cognitive enhancement, despite all its horror, gave Subject 7 something beyond intelligence, gave him the ability to choose control, choose discipline, choose hope over despair. That's more than some humans can manage. I'm writing this in case it all goes wrong, in case the projection escapes during transport and I have to take drastic action, in case the federal agents track us down and I need evidence of what really happened at the sanctuary. But mostly, I'm writing this because I need someone to understand. Subject 7 isn't a failed experiment, isn't a monster created by reckless science. He's a person trapped in an animal body with abilities he never wanted and burdens he didn't choose. And if that's not deserving of compassion, of effort, of hope, then maybe we don't deserve to call ourselves researchers. Maybe we're just torturers with government funding. Tomorrow, I clear out my office, pack my equipment, say goodbye to the chimps I've studied for 4 years, and next week, in the darkest part of night, I open a bunker door and let something impossible emerge into the world. Something that smiles like a human. Something that hopes like a human. Something that suffers like a human, but will never be human enough for the world to accept. Unless I can find a place remote enough, safe enough, isolated enough. I have to try, because that's what he signed to me last night. Through the bunker door, in the absolute darkness, 30 feet beneath the sanctuary grounds. Not animal, not human, just me. And that's enough. That has to be enough.